All right, so one of the first things we want to address is I'll get some people and they start playing with the synth and they're like, "Well, it doesn't make that sound, bro. I mean, it doesn't sound like the violin. It doesn't sound like nothing I'm trying to create." So they get frustrated. So the understanding of that is that I wanted to show you a quick example. Is that when you've got a sound and you've researched this sound and or you're just messing around. Hopefully that you're going about this the correct way and following the instruction I've showed you, that you're probably not running into it as much, but you're definitely getting an understanding maybe your synth isn't going to be able to do what you want it to do, and you're going to have to get some type of different synthesizer. Because basically, we had talked about how it's basically shaped like this violin is basically shaped like a triangle wave, but it's not exactly a triangle wave, right? And you look at the harmonic content that, the actual frequencies in it, the harmonics in it, aren't equal all the way across the spectrum there. Their levels, are different. The modulation can be addressed, but the actual levels, have to be taken into consideration. So the real simple understanding that I just wanted to address first is that if you get on there and you put on your triangle waveform and you expect it to sound exactly like a violin, well, it's not. You really have to look at your synthesizer to think, well, is character going to add that stuff to it? If I go in here and I add, ampog, fuzz and minor harmonia, one of these modules, is that going to add harmonic content that's going to start getting it closer to what I want? Or drive. Sometimes drive on the synthesizer will start adding that also. If you can't add basic content or a lot of oscillators to build it. But when you're just looking at the wavetable, and you start messing around with those sounds, I wanted to give a simple example for you to see that, on this one, it's really obvious that here's the same note on a natural violin, and here's the same note on that synthesizer, using the triangle waveform. Well, what does that look like? Well, you can see immediately, what are you seeing? First of all, you're seeing is that, here's a frequency, that's not there. That frequency's gone. This one's there, you can see that. This one is not there. This one is there, you can see that harmonic content's inside of that sound. That one's missing, this one's here, that one's missing, and then it's, skipping some. So, can you address that? Do you have tools on that synth to address that issue? So that, because some people start playing around with that and start with the wavetable synthesizer and realize it's sounding like this and they don't understand why, because it's missing harmonic content. What else is it missing? Noise. Okay, so on that synthesizer you're seeing noise, so is that going to do that? You need to start fussing with that to see, putting those two waves next to each other to see, is my synthesizer doing that? When I put on my synthesizer and I put it next to that sound, is it doing, it doesn't have to be an exact replication, it doesn't have to be exactly, because we've talked about, waveforms and how that it's going to be quasi-periodic, aperiodic. But there's a bunch of distortion in there and also wideband. And on that synthesizer that I've showed you here on this one, that it adds some oscillators when you put spread on there. So that spread actually starts doing some stuff to this. Is that doing that to this here? Is that making it more like that? Because just looking at it, like that, you look at it pretty close, it's pretty similar to that, except for there's a bunch of modulation going on there. And if you look really close, what else is happening? You're seeing things like, it looks like there's like 3 frequencies that are doing some decimal modulation. And it might be doing some frequency modulation in there also that is too fine to see with this spectrophone. So, I don't know if you could pull it out farther and see it, can you see that? Well, you probably can't see the frequency modulation, so you'd have to isolate it and listen to it and see if you're hearing that. But those couple things have become real obvious, so that, if you're playing with a wavetable synthesizer and getting frustrated because it doesn't sound like it, there's the issue. You understand that? So I just kind of address that, because I'll get people that'll say that at first, and then they just don't want to play it anymore. It doesn't sound like nothing, and it's like, well, that's why, and things you need to look at for parameters on your synthesizer that are going to start adding that harmonic content. Does that make sense? Or you need to get a synthesizer that is better able to reproduce that. So I just kind of wanted to address that, because I'll get people that say that, and it's like, there's the issue. Does that make sense? And it can be different with when you're dealing with like if you're dealing with like, you know, a square wave. Now, square waves, a lot of times that you're dealing with amplitude, you start dealing with modulations, and the pulse width, the actual width, and we've already talked about that, can have a real defining factor in that unnatural sound, that digital sound. So, you know, you might be able to get really close with that, you know, just by itself. It might really start to sound like something digital and some kind of sound you're working at with. But those other sounds, if it's, you know, something close to a saw wave or a triangle wave or, you know, something other thing that the wavetable, sometimes if you can get a good synth that has a wavetable with you know, very well mapped out, harmonic content, you know, that of certain instruments, that's really cool. But, you know, if you don't, and that's what's going on, that's the frustration part, and that's what's happening. So I just kind of want to address that real quick. Alright, so you've seen the last video and we were talking about, you know, some of the issues you might run into that. So I went through in my synthesizer and addressed it a little bit, and you look at it now and it looks pretty close to it. One issue we're having is distortion, you know, the actual noise. So they know that trying to actually simulate that actual noise going into it, and, you know, the levels of it so that it actually will emulate that sound without being too much. So, you know, we've got some more noise in there and it looks like a little bit much, but, you know, even just that basic thing that, you know, there's some noise, but it's not a lot. What are we missing? I mean, we're missing this other frequency down here, which basically looks like we're looking at this frequency, we're starting off at A, and this other frequency thing over here looks like it's C4. So C4, it's looking like that's A again, the first harmonic content. So you're going up to your E and then A6, that should be C. So it's that, you know, it's one of those harmonics that's down below it, that's getting represented down below it, that we're missing in our waveform. But we got a pretty good pretty good, you know, example of it here. So let's just kind of take a look at what we did do. This is just kind of an example so that you can understand some of the frustrations you might run into. The first thing is my attack, decay, sustain, and release might not be quite right. You know, we're missing that one frequency that has to be dealt with another oscillator or some type of parameter that can add that kind of frequency. But I probably didn't spend enough time on looking at the ADSR and looking at that waveform to really get the actual, you know, ADSR of it sculpted out really well in time. You know, so that, I mean, it can be very specific, you know, how fast that attack is, how fast that decay is, and the sustain. Sometimes it's not real obvious, but if you spend some time looking at it, you can get it worked out fairly well. So that was probably one problem. The other problem I'm having is we already talked about that waveform not emulating exactly. I did put random phase on it. I found one of the parameters on this synth has got character. So I found one that actually added some more harmonic content to it. So I adjusted and messing around with it till I got it. I put a low pass filter on there that cut it off, you know, about, you know, as to where you could see that it was about the same structure as the other one. I added some drive, a little bit of punch. I put some resin on it. I had brought that cutoff down like we had talked about. And I put another oscillator on there. And the same kind of waveform, I detuned it just a little bit, like 3 or 4 cents. If you watch those videos I did on spatialization, and that you understand that pretty well. I brought the level up not quite as much, random phase again. Added some noise and some level, but it doesn't seem to be spread out over the whole spectrum like it should. So I'm not, you know, it's some of that noise level. It doesn't look too bad, but up in the upper spectrum, if I turn it up too much, then it's way too much in the lower spectrum, not enough in the higher spectrum. So I have some way I can deal with that. You know, I'm not really sure how I can go about trying to fix that. I put the low frequency oscillator on here, and with a delay on it and a delay on the second one. The first LFO I sent to the oscillator's one's pitch, its frequency, you know, the pitch of it, you know, for frequency modulation, and then the second LFO I sent to the first oscillator's level for volume modulation, and then the first LFO I sent that also, but I reversed it to the second oscillator's pitch, and the second LFO that I sent to the oscillator 2's level. So that I kind of mixed and matched them so that, you know, it would be not real, you know, you know, there's no randomness on this one. So there was no way to really create the randomness effect with it. So I had to kind of mix and match them, try to get some kind of almost random sound thing kind of happening there. And I put on some modulation. I did some modulation besides that on it. I put some delay on it. It was some feedback, and then mixed that in. I put a little bit of reverb on there, and I put a little bit of distortion on there. Now, it still doesn't sound like a dang violin, right? Okay, so, you know, the understanding of that, so that when you start messing around with that stuff, I just wanted to, you know, we didn't go through this real technical, but just so that you can understand that, you know, when you start trying to sculpt those sounds, that, you know, the analysis of the sound is very important. And then when you get done with the analysis of the sound, is your synthesizer going to be able to reproduce that? That's the second thing you need to look at. That way that you know what you have to work with, because when you start getting frustrated with a synthesizer, or you're not going nowhere, you throw it in the garbage synthesizer, it might be a great synthesizer to do some things, and some things it might not do really well. So, you know, you really need to look at that real close. So, you know, did you analyze the sound well? So, okay, did you do the ADSR well? Do you need to, you know, or does it have the abilities to do it as well as it needs to be done? You know, things like, you know, do I need more oscillators? And, you know, does that waveform not the way to go? The way the harmonic content in it isn't working, you know, the levels of the other harmonics aren't good enough to do what I want to do. The character aspects, the other aspects, what the heck is that, you know, modules that may be doing something and adding harmonic content or other things, is that thing actually going to be able to get done what I need it to do? The filters all seem to work fine. I don't know that drive might have added some different harmonic content to actually, you know, distort it to add harmonic content that, you know, maybe that one's not good enough. Or is it fine doing what it does? The oscillators, I need some randomness in there. So with that sound, I didn't have randomness, and it's sounding too static. It's sounding too mechanical. I did have detuning for spatialization. I wish I had a couple more oscillators, 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 oscillators, so I could really get some of that delay and some of that tuning thing done for spatialization to really get a good sound on that. You know, the LFOs, you know, there's no randomness on there. I've tried some of the waveforms. I really spent time going through there, and, you know, it's, you know, that's, you know, I don't have any more LFOs to work with, all these separate parameters, putting a different LFO on them to really create that randomness sound, or do I? And also I went through there and I put some modulation, delay, and reverb on there, and I put some distortion on there. Now, the whole point of this, just kind of looking at it like that, is to really understand two things. Did you analyze it well? Do you really understand what you need to do with that sound? The second thing is, you know, the parameters on your synth, are they going to be able to reproduce those things? The modulations, the ADSR, the harmonic content that you need, the type of noise that you need to reproduce what's going on there. Is it going to do that? Do you have enough LFOs? Are LFOs doing what you need it to do for that? All those aspects, any of the other effects that might be on the synthesizer, are they going to be able to do that? Or are you going to mess around like this all day long, you know, seriously analyze this piece of audio or trying to sculpt something really cool, and then come to a point to where it's never, I spent, you know, a week and a half every evening I had, you know, trying to sculpt this sound, and I never get in there and it's garbage or something, and I don't know what to do. You know, one section at a time. You know, your ADSR, is the tool well enough to do it? Did you spend enough time to do it? Did you spend enough time in your analysis? Did you spend enough time sculpting the ADSR? Every aspect of it, did you spend a lot of time sculpting of it and really paying attention to exactly what you're doing? Or so that if you're coming out with something, is it able to do what you want to do? Or is it going to kind of come out sounding that way? And so you're getting frustrated because it's not doing exactly, it doesn't sound exactly like a violin now. So, I mean, I don't know what to do with it. What am I going to do with that garbage? It doesn't sound, I mean, it doesn't sound like a violin. So I kind of wanted to go through that with you so that, you know, when you're sitting there messing around with them, that really go back and look at those things that we've talked about so that you don't end up in this situation, right? This is what you're trying to avoid, so that you don't come up with this thing and then get frustrated because of the aspects we talked. So let's try some other work in the next video. Peace, hope, love.